You know, um, when we stand in front of a massive stone cathedral, our eyes just naturally drift straight up,
Yeah, to the stained glass, usually.
right, the stained glass. We admire the flying buttresses. We point at the giant looming steeples.
But we never really stop to look at the mortar.
No, we don't. That gray, gritty paste shoved between the massive blocks of granite. But, I mean, without it, the whole structure just collapses into a pile of rubble. The stones wouldn't have any relationship to one another.
They'd just be a pile of rocks.
Absolutely. So, welcome to Reformed Thinking. Today's deep dive looks at the textual mortar of the ancient world. We're zeroing in on a single Hebrew letter, the letter Beth.
Which functions in the ancient text as a preposition represented by the sound B in English.
Right.
It is the grammatical glue, basically, holding the narrative, the laws, and the poetry of the ancient Hebrew text together.
Now, spending an entire deep dive on a single preposition might sound, well, a bit unusual to you.
A little overly academic, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. But this specific letter, gres, functions as a conceptual master key. Because depending on the context, the word it attaches to and the phrasing around it, it translates to in, at, with, by, against, and, well, dozens of other English concepts.
It does a lot of heavy lifting. And understanding this tiny prefix uncovers new layers of meaning. It alters how we read historical events and massive theological declarations.
Oh, for sure.
When you grasp how the ancient writers used this letter, you start seeing the precision of the text in a way you likely never noticed before.
So, to set the stage for you, we need to look at a linguistic quirk of this letter first. Because in biblical Hebrew, re is what linguists call a proclitic.
Right, meaning it has no independent existence.
None at all. You will never, ever find the letter Beth sitting all by itself on a scroll with spaces on either side of it. It leans on the word following it for its very existence.
It's always attached directly to the front of another word, and because it's physically fused to the front of a noun or a verb, its pronunciation actually shapeshifts.
Depending on the phonetic makeup of its host word, right?
Yes.
So it's kind of like a phonetic chameleon. It takes on the vocal color of whatever it touches.
That's a highly accurate way to view it. The default pronunciation is a short, clipped B sound, like the first syllable of the English word believe.
Okay, B.
But if it attaches to a word that starts with certain consonants or vowels, the vocalization shifts to match the environment. So it can become bat, bee, or bow.
Oh, yeah.
For example, if you attach it to the word for blood, which is dum, it becomes badum. But under certain grammatical conditions where the article is absorbed, the vowel lengthens and it becomes badum.
So it's a very fluid, adaptable piece of language.
Very much so.
Okay, so we have this tiny shape-shifting letter permanently glued to the front of other words. And early rabbinic scholars obsessively cataloged every nuance of the Hebrew language.
They really did. They left nothing out.
Yeah, and they grouped the functions of this letter into a few distinct categories. The most common one, the one you'll encounter on almost every single page of the text, is what they called the Beth vasculi, the Beth of the vessel.
Yeah. The most literal spatial translation of this preposition is in. It places a subject inside a specific physical boundary.
So, spatial boundaries.
Right. If you attach it to the word for house, bayit, you get babayit in the house. Attach it to the word for land, ari, and you get bari in the land.
That feels incredibly straightforward for English speakers. I mean,
Yeah.
You walk through a door, you are in the house. You cross a border, you are in the land. You're just sitting inside a physical location.
It seems straightforward, but the ancient Hebrew mind extends this concept of the container far beyond physical walls or geographical borders.
How so?
Well, the idea of being inside scales up and scales down in ways English doesn't naturally do. For instance, it scales up to mean being among a multitude. In Lamentations 1.3, the text describes the fallen city of Jerusalem dwelling Bagoyim. That translates to among the nations.
So the surrounding nations are viewed as this massive collective container, and Jerusalem is sitting right in the middle of it.
Spot on.
The nations aren't just like neighbors on a map. They are the encompassing reality holding the city in place.
Yes, the multitude itself forms the boundary. And we see a similar scaling up in the Song of Solomon, chapter 1, verse 8.
Oh, right, where the beloved is called the fairest among women.
Yes. The Hebrew uses this preposition to place her inside the collective group of all women. It makes the entire gender a conceptual room, basically, and then singles her out from within that space.
That is fascinating. And it scales down to highly specific granular actions, too.
Yeah.
Like in Genesis when Noah is gathering the animals for the ark.
The text uses this preposition to talk about taking a selection from the fowl or from the cattle.
So the entire flock is the container, and the action reaches inside that boundary to pull out a specific part.
The spatial logic is relentlessly consistent. The subject is always interacting with the boundary.
Okay, I want to push on that boundary concept for a second, because I noticed it might throw you off if you're listening.
Which one?
In Amos chapter 6, verse 6, the text criticizes people who are lounging around drinking from bowls of wine. But the literal Hebrew idiom doesn't say they drink from a cup. It says they drink in a cup.
Ah, yes. That is a classic example of how different languages conceptualize physical action.
Right, because in English, our minds focus on the extraction. We take the liquid out of the vessel and put it into ourselves.
Yeah.
The vessel is just like the starting point of the liquid's trajectory.
Right.
But the Hebrew phrasing, drinking in a cup, puts the action entirely inside the boundary of the vessel itself. Are they just viewing the boundaries of action differently?
Yes, they are. The ancient mindset focuses on the location where the human interaction with the liquid occurs.
Oh, I see.
The cup is the arena of the action. Your mouth meets the liquid within the confines of the pottery. Interestingly, this parallels the French idiom boire dans une passe, which literally translates to drinking in a cup.
So the vessel contains the entire event, not just the wine. The action doesn't leave the cup. You essentially enter the cup to perform the action.
Absolutely. And this spatial idea of being inside also applies to motion that results in a resting state.
What do you mean by a resting state?
Think about the phrase from Numbers 14.12 where it says, God is seen eye to eye. The literal Hebrew is ein bi and I and by.
I and I. Wow.
Yeah, the line of sight moves from one person and comes to rest entirely inside the vision of the other. It is not just looking at someone.
Right.
It is a weighty, intimate resting of one's gaze inside the gaze of another.
That completely removes all distance between the two parties. It implies unmediated presence. You are dwelling inside the other person's line of sight.
Yeah.
Now, if this letter can put a person inside a house, or an action inside a cup, or a gaze inside an eye, it makes sense that it naturally progresses to putting a person inside a specific state of being.
Which brings us to a really fascinating grammatical phenomenon, the Beth essentiae, or the Beth of essence.
The Beth of essence. Okay.
This is where the prefix stops indicating a physical location entirely. It stops meaning in a place, and it starts meaning as or being.
So the preposition fuses the person with their character.
Yes. A prime example of this occurs in Exodus 6.3. God is speaking to Moses, reviewing history, and he says, I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as God Almighty.
But the Hebrew literally reads, I appeared in El Shaddai.
Yes. The text is not saying God appeared inside a geographical location called El Shaddai. It means the attribute, the absolute essence of being the Almighty is the realm that God fully occupied when he revealed himself to the patriarchs.
I love that. You know, you might be trying to picture how a person dwells inside an attribute. Think of a master stage actor. When someone is completely given over to a role, we say they are in character.
Right. That's a great analogy.
They aren't just mimicking mannerisms. For those 2 hours on stage, they dwell inside that persona. But here, in the biblical text, it's not pretend. The person and the characteristic are completely fused. God is dwelling inside his own identity.
The identity is the container holding the action, and we see this with human states of being as well.
Where else?
In Deuteronomy 26.14, there is a regulation concerning tithes, and it mentions a person acting as an unclean person. The literal Hebrew is biyama, in unclean.
So the impurity is not just a label applied to them from the outside by a priest. It is a condition they are existing inside of. It surrounds them.
Yes. And consider how the Psalms talk about divine assistance. Side of my helper.
Let me guess.
Go ahead.
The Hebrew phrasing, using this preposition, literally states that the Lord is in your help.
That is spot on. His essence is acting as the helper. He does not distribute assistance from a distant throne room, like sending down aid packages.
Right, throwing help from a balcony.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, absolutely. His very nature, his essence, is actively occupying the role of the helper.
That grammatical detail carries heavy theological weight, especially if you look at the broader landscape of Reformed thought, specifically the doctrine of God's active providence.
Oh, absolutely.
This grammar supports a highly relational, highly active view of the Creator. He is not a watchmaker who wound up the universe, stepped back, and just occasionally intervenes from the outside.
No.
When he helps his people, he is essentially present in the helping. The action and his presence are indistinguishable.
The grammar demands that we see him fully present in the attribute. He occupies the action.
So we see how this letter places things inside containers and how it fuses a subject with its essence. But dwelling inside a state of being sounds very peaceful and static, and language has to account for movement and collision.
It does.
And this little letter is also responsible for bringing things into sudden, jarring contact.
Which is the second rabbinic category. Beth conjunctionis et viciniae. Conjunction and vicinity. Conceptually, the preposition moves from meaning inside to meaning right up against.
Okay, right up against.
It denotes proximity and contact, translating to at, by, or on. So if a text states a sacrifice is placed on the altar, it uses this preposition.
Or if the prophet Ezekiel receives his vision by the river Chabar.
Right. He uses this preposition to indicate he is right up against the water's edge.
The Hebrew language handles verbs of physical contact in a way that feels very different to an English speaker. I mean, verbs like touching, grasping, or adhering.
Yeah, whenever you have a verb involving physical contact, it almost always requires the Beth preposition.
Which is so weird for us, because in English we simply say, he touched the wall. The verb acts directly on the object.
But in biblical Hebrew, you do not just touch something. You touch in or at it.
So the action of reaching out makes contact with the boundary of the object. And this preposition acts as the bridge across the physical gap.
Yes. The human hand moves through space and comes into sudden conjunction with the stone.
So it basically functions as the preposition of friction.
Friction, yes.
Whether a shepherd is grasping a staff, a man is clinging to a friend, or a soldier is striking an enemy, you use "gu" because it covers any scenario where two boundaries collide in the physical world.
It really covers the entire spectrum of human friction. And tracing how this idea of physical contact develops, you see it naturally bleed into the concept of hostility.
Oh, sure. If you move forcefully against someone, you are making aggressive contact. The boundary collision is violent.
So the preposition shifts from meaning at or by to meaning against. Genesis 16.my offers a perfect illustration of this.
That's the prophecy given to Hagar, right?
Yes. In the wilderness regarding her unborn son, Ishmael, the angel tells her, his hand will be against every man, and the hand of every man against him. The word translating to against is our preposition, gu.
Literally, his hand is in contact with everyone. But the context dictates that the contact is combative.
Yeah.
It paints a striking picture of relentless relational friction. He is constantly pushing up against the boundaries of his neighbors.
And this combative contact applies seamlessly to abstract hostility, too. When the text discusses sinning against someone, acting treacherously against God, or rebelling against a king, it employs this preposition.
Oh, wow. So grammatically speaking, sin is an act of friction.
Yes.
It is pushing up against the boundaries of God's covenant. It's not a passive failing like accidentally dropping a ball. It is active hostility.
And that aligns remarkably well with the Reformed view of human nature. Sin is an act of rebellion, a willful pushing against the holy nature of God.
Yes, yes.
The grammar itself treats the transgression as a point of hostile contact between the creature and the Creator.
It is a collision of wills. And, this preposition can even carry the meaning of bringing hostility down upon someone, resulting in a heavy physical burden.
We see that in the famous legal idiom, his blood be upon his head, found in places like Joshua 2.19.
Upon his head. So that uses the Beth preposition.
Yes. The responsibility, the guilt, and the subsequent punishment are brought down into direct contact with the offender. The justice of the situation rests on them, using this exact prefix.
It grounds abstract concepts like guilt and justice in physical reality. Guilt isn't just a floating concept or a bad feeling in your stomach. It sits heavily on your head.
Right. And if draw handles physical contact and pushing against boundaries, it logically follows that it is the word used when picking up a tool or an object to accomplish a task.
Okay, so this covers the English concepts of with, by, or through, the instrument you hold in your hand to make contact with the world.
The third rabbinic category, Beth auxiliary, the Beth of help or instrument. When a subject uses an instrument to carry out an action, this prefix attaches to the instrument.
Give me an example.
If a warrior fights with a sword, the sword receives the prefix. If an invading army tramples the ground with their feet, the feet receive the prefix. If an artisan creates a masterpiece out of or with gold, the gold receives the prefix.
So the tool basically becomes an extension of the actor. The boundary between the human hand and the iron sword dissolves grammatically.
That's a great way to put it. And this instrumental use extends far beyond inanimate objects. It applies to human beings acting as agents for a higher authority.
I was actually reading through the Exodus account the other day, and whenever a command is given by the hand of Moses, the text uses this preposition.
Yes, it does.
Or when a prophet speaks to the nation, the text might say, they prophesied by God. Conversely, false prophets are said to prophesy by Baal.
The deity is the inspiring instrument. The prophet acts as the visible mouthpiece, but the unseen force animating the message is marked by this preposition.
This brings up a massive point regarding how we understand divine agency. When God speaks through a prophet, the prophet is the physical means, but God is the primary actor.
Right.
The grammar maintains that hierarchy. God uses secondary causes, human beings, nature, historical empires, to accomplish his sovereign will.
He works through them. The grammar establishes a chain of causality. The supreme will operates by means of the earthly instrument.
And that is a core pillar of the Westminster Confession. God ordains whatsoever comes to pass, but he does so using ordinary means.
Yes.
He doesn't violate the will of the creature, but he works through them. And this little prefix basically functions as the grammatical injure for that entire doctrine.
It really does. Moving from the theological to the practical, though, there is a fascinating idiom regarding this instrumental use.
Oh, I think I know what you're going to bring up. Let's hear it.
In ancient Hebrew, there is no single distinct verb that perfectly translates to the English word bring.
Yeah, that is so wild. You might be wondering how an entire civilization operates without a word for bring. It seems like a pretty basic concept.
It does. But instead of a dedicated verb, they use a combination of action and instrument. To express the concept of bringing something to a location, they take the verb to come, and they combine it with this preposition. You come with something.
So if I want to bring a gift to a dinner party, I would literally say, I am coming with a gift.
Yes. And if you want to take something away from a location, you take the verb to go and add the preposition. You go away with it.
That is so literal.
The action of movement is modified by the instrument you are holding in your hand.
That forces you to visualize the action in a highly grounded way. I am not magically making an object appear at your house. I am physically traveling across the land, and the object is my companion on the route. It makes the language sweat.
Because the ancient Hebrew worldview didn't neatly divide the spiritual or abstract realm from the physical realm, the body acts as the instrument of the soul.
You see that in the poetry all the time.
Yeah.
You do not just mock someone. The text phrases it as you open with the mouth.
Yes.
You don't just show anger, you gnash with the teeth. You don't just shout, you utter with the voice.
Yeah.
Everything requires a physical instrument.
If you mock someone, your mouth is the weapon. If you are angry, your teeth are the grinding stones. The Beth preposition locks the physical body to the emotional state.
You can't escape the physical reality of what you are doing. Your body is implicated in your emotions.
Very true.
Now, if we connect the idea of using an instrument to accomplish a goal, we arrive at the idea of trading an item to acquire a prize.
Which introduces the economics of the preposition. We are talking about an ancient barter economy here.
Right. There are no credit cards, no digital bank transfers, no paper money.
In a barter system, the price you pay is treated grammatically as the instrument you use to acquire the goods.
So you're using your silver or your physical labor as the tool to pry the item from the seller's hands.
Yes. The preposition translates as for or at the cost of. This is the Beth predii, the Beth of price.
Okay.
When Abraham purchases the cave of Machpelah to bury Sarah in Genesis 23, the text states he bought the field for silver. The word silver has the Beth prefix attached.
And when Jacob works for Laban in Genesis 29,
He served 7 years for Rachel.
wow. His 7 years of grueling labor in the sun was the instrument of purchase. His sweat was the currency.
And this economic grammar also forms the basis for ancient legal standards, doesn't it?
It does. The famous phrase from Deuteronomy 19.21, life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, relies heavily on the specific use of the preposition.
Break that down for us.
The first I is the damaged object. The second I carries the Beth prefix, denoting the equal exchange or the standard of measurement required to satisfy the broken law.
So it's not a metaphor for revenge.
Not at all.
It is a strict economic ledger. The scales of justice are unbalanced by the crime. The law demands an exact matching weight to balance the ledger. You can't take a life for an eye. The grammar limits the payment to the exact cost of the damage.
The punishment must fit the crime precisely. It establishes a firm limit on human retaliation.
And as Protestant Christians, this specific grammatical concept is central to how we understand the cross. The concept of substitutionary atonement relies entirely on this economic framework.
The debt of human sin requires a specific, infinite payment. Christ steps in and offers his life for the lives of his people. His blood functions as the currency. The ledger is balanced.
The grammar of the Old Testament law sets up the framework that the New Testament authors later use to explain the work of Christ. The debt is paid. The instrument of purchase is his sacrifice.
It all connected.
It is. We also see high-stakes examples of this economic grammar in the historical narratives.
Oh, the story of David's mighty men always stands out to me here.
It's a perfect example. In 2 Samuel 23, David is hiding in the cave of Adullam. He is exhausted, and he expresses a deep longing to drink water from the well of Bethlehem.
But Bethlehem is currently occupied by a heavily armed Philistine garrison.
Right, so 3 of his elite soldiers hear his desire, break through the enemy lines, draw the water from the well, and fight their way back to bring it to him.
He holds the water in his hands, but he refuses to drink it. He pours it out on the ground as an offering to the Lord.
His reasoning for doing so hinges entirely on our preposition. He says, "Shall I drink the blood of the men who went at the peril of their lives?" But the literal Hebrew phrasing is that they went in their lives.
In their lives.
Their lives were the currency spent to acquire the water. They purchased that water at the cost of their own safety.
Wow.
In David's mind, the water was economically equivalent to their blood. That is why he treats it as a sacred sacrifice rather than a mere beverage to quench his thirst.
So you could almost visualize door as the ancient equivalent of a currency symbol, or maybe an equal sign in a ledger book.
Yeah, an equal sign is a great way to think about it.
It balances the scales. We put the action or the acquired item on one side, and the addict introduces the exact weight required to balance it on the other side.
It creates a perfect equation of value.
Up until now, we have looked at how this prefix handles physical objects, locations, and economic transactions. Things we can touch, borders we can cross, and silver we can trade. But the language also dictates what goes on inside the human mind.
We need to examine how we interacts with verbs of sensible perception and verbs of time. This is where the grammar performs some truly remarkable gymnastics.
All right, let's start with perception. Seeing, hearing, smelling.
In English, if I say, "I saw the man," it is a neutral statement of fact. My eyes registered his physical presence in the room.
Sure.
The Hebrew language has a standard way of conveying that basic information. But if you take a verb of seeing, hearing, or smelling, and you pair it with the Beth preposition, it radically changes the nature of the perception.
It adds an intense layer of intention and emotion, doesn't it?
It denotes an attentive or pleasurable exercise of that sense.
So you don't just see something, you look upon it with deep satisfaction, you linger on it.
Or conversely, you look upon it with a malicious joy.
Right.
The book of Obadiah condemns the neighboring nation of Edom for looking upon the destruction of Jerusalem. The text uses this preposition to indicate that they weren't just neutral bystanders watching a tragic historical event happen.
They were gazing at the ruin of their brother with glee.
Yes. The preposition turns a biological function site into a moral action.
A single letter changes the sentence from, "I witnessed an event," to, "I fed my dark soul by staring at an event." It implicates the viewer in the violence.
The same principle applies to hearing. You don't just hear a noise in the distance, you listen attentively, soaking in the sound, letting it wash over you.
Or smelling.
Right, you don't just register a passing odor, you breathe it in with satisfaction, like God smelling the pleasing aroma of a sacrifice.
So the preposition indicates that the person perceiving the thing is fully engaged, resting their attention completely inside the sensation.
There is that concept of the container again. They are placing their perception inside the event.
That is wild. All right, that covers sensible perception. What about time?
Time is treated grammatically as a location. You can be inside a moment, just like you can be inside a house.
So the phrase bayom literally means on the day or in the day.
Famously, the very first word of the Hebrew Bible, Genesis 1:1, is bershi, in the beginning. The word resheh means beginning or first part, and the Beth prefix places the massive action of creation squarely inside that temporal starting point.
God speaks the universe into existence, and the text anchors that action inside the container of time. It assumes God exists outside the container, and he is placing the event into the newly constructed timeline.
This temporal function of the prefix leads to one of its most versatile uses in the entire language. When you attach "u" to an infinitive verb, it stops acting like a simple preposition and starts creating entire complex clauses.
To give you a reference point, an infinitive verb describes the action itself without a specific subject attached to it. Running, eating, building.
Right. And in Biblical Hebrew, when you stick this prefix onto an infinitive construct, you create a phrase that dictates the timing or the cause of the main action in the sentence.
I was actually looking at Genesis 2.4 for this.
Yeah.
The text talks about the generations of the heavens and the earth. The Hebrew says, "Behibayim," literally in their being created. But that is clunky for an English reader. Our translations smooth it out by saying, "when they were created."
The single letter, Beth, replaces the English word when. It anchors the action to a simultaneous moment, in the time of their being created.
It acts as an incredibly efficient piece of grammatical shorthand,
And it is not solely used for time. It can be used to indicate cause.
replacing the English word because.
In Genesis 19.16, the angels are physically pulling Lot out of Sodom before fire falls on the city. The literal Hebrew reads, "in the compassion of the Lord upon him."
Okay.
But the contextual logical meaning is, because the Lord had compassion upon him. The prefix indicates that the compassion was the realm, or the cause, out of which the physical rescue occurred.
You know, you might be thinking at this point, how does a letter that means "in" magically translate to "although"? It sounds like translators are just making things up to fit the narrative.
Yeah.
But look at the mechanism.
It acts as a concessive conjunction. Consider Psalm 46.3. "Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains quake in the heart of the sea."
Look.
The literal Hebrew for "though the mountains quake" is "in the quaking of the mountains."
We will not fear in the quaking of the mountains.
The psalmist is placing his lack of fear directly inside the container of a massive, terrifying event. The quaking is happening all around him, but the fear is absent.
Wow.
English translators use the word "although" to convey this contrast, but the Hebrew simply forces the two conflicting realities into the exact same space.
That paints a much more vivid picture. I am standing inside an earthquake, but my peace is completely intact. It highlights the total sovereignty of God over circumstances. The believer doesn't need to escape the container of suffering to find peace. The peace exists inside the quaking because God is present there.
That is the theological payoff of understanding the grammar. You start to see how the worldview of the biblical writers was wired into the very structure of their sentences. The language itself preaches the sermon.
Let's step back and look at the massive landscape we have covered today.
Wow.
We took a single letter, a prefix that cannot even stand on its own, and we have seen how it carries the weight of the entire ancient world.
It places us inside physical containers and abstract collectives.
It takes an attribute and turns it into an essence that someone can dwell inside of. It sparks hostile friction between enemies. It brokers economic trades, balancing the scales of justice with blood and silver.
It turns passive sight into active, malicious joy.
And it dictates the flow of time and causality, replacing English words like when, because, and although.
And I want to leave you with one final provocative thought regarding the origin of this letter.
Okay, let's hear it.
We noted earlier that this prefix leans on other words, but languages evolve over thousands of years. Particles like this usually have an origin story.
Historical linguists propose an etymological theory for this. Scholars suggest that this tiny prefix, now dri, is actually a severe abbreviation of an ancient word, specifically the word beit.
Which means house.
Over centuries of rapid speech and linguistic evolution, the word for house shrunk down until only the first consonant remained, permanently glued to the front of the next word.
That lines up perfectly given the primary spatial meaning we discussed at the beginning. Inside the vessel, inside the container.
But I want you to mull over the implications of that theory. If it holds true, it means that every time ancient speakers used this letter to describe a location or a transaction or a moment in time, they were subconsciously placing those concepts inside a conceptual house.
They were domesticating reality.
When God places you in a land, He is building a house for you. When justice demands an eye for an eye, it is balancing the household ledger. When an event happens in the beginning, time itself is a structure being built room by room.
How does viewing every action, every price paid, and every moment of time as dwelling within its own specific divinely ordained house alter the way you read the text?
If the universe is not just random, chaotic space, but a series of rooms constructed by a sovereign God, how does that change your perspective on where you are standing right now? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the mortar of the text. We will see you next time in Reformed Thinking.